morning. Here's a list of questions. Now I'm not going to ask you to write the answers. We're just going to kind of look at these a little bit and see if we can remember what we learned yesterday. Look at that first one. What does it mean to bribe somebody? You just say what you think it is out loud. Remember, it's to pay someone to do something, to cause him to make a decision. Like to pay someone to make a decision that you want them to make. That's what a bribe is. What were the three major problems at the end of the Reconstruction that we learned yesterday? Do you remember? That one big word? Corruption, violence, and jobs. They couldn't find jobs, lack of work. Who was elected president in 1868? Do you remember? It was Ulysses S. Grant. Remember, he was the Northern general in the Civil War. What kind of corruption were lawmakers part of? They were taking bribes. That's how they were corrupted. They were corrupt because, well, one thing was they weren't turning in the money they were supposed to. Remember those taxpayers? That was just one example. Another was they were taking bribes in order to vote a certain way. Do you remember Thomas Nast? How did he make fun of corrupt people? Do you remember what he did? He drew those cartoons, those pictures, made fun of them. Why did most black people stop voting even though the army was protecting them? It was way too dangerous for them. Way too dangerous. Why did freedmen hope to get land after the war? They wanted that land so they could become their own farmers, independent farmers. What system, though, developed in the South between the farmers and the landowners? Do you remember what it was? It was called sharecropping. And how did sharecropping work? Remember we looked at that diagram yesterday? It was kind of not fair, I think, wasn't it? They had to rent the land and the house, and they had to borrow money in order to get the things they needed, plant it, and then harvest it, and give the owners part of what they got, plus pay them rent, which pretty much took everything they had, and a lot of times they didn't even have enough left. All right, let's look at our book. We're going to be on page 50. We're going to finish the chapter today, and then we'll get ready to take the chapter review and the test tomorrow. All right, let's look at page 50. This is the end of the Northern Reconstruction. We are at the end. So let's look. This was different hopes and goals, different things. We're going to find out what happened at the end of Reconstruction and what changes took place in the North. We talked about changes in the South. We're going to talk about changes in the North. So let's look up here. Remember, you got to read along with me. When Reconstruction began, the three major groups of Americans each had different hopes and goals. Freedmen wanted to be independent. They wanted to be treated fairly and to have the chance to own their own land. Southerners wanted to govern their own states again. They hoped to restore or bring back the South as closely as they could how it was before the war. Northerners wanted to make sure the Civil War was not in vain. They hoped to rebuild the South and make it like the North. They also wanted to make sure the freedmen were treated fairly. But as problems grew in the South, Northerners became less interested in changing the South. Look at page 51. So even though there were changes in the South, the Southerners still wanted the South to be like it was before the war. And I don't know that every Southerner wanted that, and I don't know that the ones that wanted it to stay the same wanted it to stay the exact same. Maybe with a few changes, but go back to being its, good independent self. But the North had their own situations. So at the top of page 51, that's a picture, a real picture of President Ulysses S. Grant. In 1877, Rutherford B. Hayes became president. By this year, things had changed. Events in the North made Northerners rethink their views of Southern politics. The corruption during Ulysses S. Grant's 8 years as president made Northerners focus on their own problems. It also made them more likely to agree with Southerners when they complained that Republicans in the South were corrupt. Since Southern Republicans were mainly freedmen, scalawags, and carpetbaggers, some Northerners began to think that Southern Democrats should be allowed to take over the Southern government again. So now the problems are the Northerners like, maybe the Southerners were right. The Northern economy also took Northerners' minds off the Reconstruction. Starting in 1873, many businesses closed. Some banks had to be shut down. Several railroads went bankrupt. Going bankrupt means not being able to pay the money that you owe. And during this time, many people lost their jobs. These events were known as the Panic of 1873. Northerners were too busy worrying about work and business to try to keep helping the South. Northerners also wondered why the freedmen still needed help. Some Northerners thought that since the slaves had been free since 1865, they should be able to take care of themselves by now. For many Northerners, enough time had passed since the Civil War that the fighting was just a memory. Their cities had never been burned. Their railroads had not been destroyed. The war seemed very far away to the Northerners. They struggled to understand why the freedmen kept wanting more help. I'm sure it took a long time for the South and for the freedmen to get back to the way life should be or would have been. Look at the top of page 52. The freedmen's position had improved a little since the war ended. Some owned land, but many more rented small pieces of land. Their children went to school. However, anyone with black skin was treated as less important than someone with white skin. The freedmen feared that if Northerners stopped caring about the South, the freedmen's lives would become worse. As Northern influence left the South, most freedmen tried to fit into the new situation. It was not as good as what they had hoped for at emancipation or freedom of slavery. However, their new situation was not as bad as slavery. So they had progressed some, but not as well as they had hoped. They were better off than when they were in slavery, but they still weren't as well off as the freed white man. So in the end of Reconstruction, by the end of the 1870s, Reconstruction had come to an end. Southern Democrats now controlled all the state governments in the South. The end of Reconstruction fulfilled some of the white Southerners' hopes. When Northern troops left the South, freedmen lost their protection. Many who used to be leaders in the South came back to power, but the Southerners' new world was different from the old. The South was not the same as before. Railroads and industry had entered the South. Cities like Atlanta, Georgia, began building factories and businesses in the South. In the end, Reconstruction did not exactly fulfill anyone's goals. President Lincoln, in his second inaugural address, said that he wanted Americans to achieve and cherish a just and a lasting peace among themselves. The peace in America was not complete or completely just. By the end of the Reconstruction in 1877, more Americans enjoyed more liberties than they did in 1860. So there was more freedom by the end of the Reconstruction, but there was still hatred and there was still lots of racial segregation going on, and that actually would last for another many years. And even today, there's not segregation so much, but there's a lot of racial tension today in the world, and it's not just black people against white people, it's all different kinds. So we have to be careful with that kind of thing, because that can get into some major situations. All right, so we've come to the end of our chapter. So let's look at page 22 in your work text. Now on this page, on each question, there's 12 questions. And you've got 3 choices on each question. You've got a blue Northern soldier. It's a Union soldier. The one in gray is a Confederate soldier. He's a soldier from the South in the middle. And then the one on the right stands for a freedman. So you have a Union, a Confederate, or North, South, and a freedman. So what we have to do is we have to read the question and we have to circle which one it applies to. So on number 1 it says, became less interested in changing the South. Who was that? It'd be the North. So you would circle the first one, the one in blue. He stands for the North. Look at number 2. Had state governments controlled by Democrats. The South. So you'll circle the one in the middle on number 2. Look at number 3. Now, I'm going to ask the question and I want you to say out loud, North, South, or freedman. Okay? Before I give you the answer to see if you're right. Number 3. Wanted to be independent. Freedman. Number 4. Wanted to be treated fairly and own their own land. Freedman. Number 5. Wanted to govern their own states again. South. Number 6. Hoped their land would be restored to how it was before the war. South. I hope you're beating me with the answers. Number 7. Wanted to make sure the Civil War was not in vain. North. Number 8. Wanted to make sure the freedmen were treated fairly. North. Number 9. Were too busy worrying about work and business to keep helping the South. North. Number 10. Were treated as less important than others. Freedmen. Number 11. Lost their protection when Northern troops left the South. Freedmen. And number 12. Gained railroads and industry. South. All right. How many of those did you beat me? I hope you beat me on all of those. I hope you got all of those right. All right. So what we're going to do, what your assignment is today, is I would like for you to go ahead and do the chapter review. It's in your work text. It's page 23 and page 24. There's 28 questions. Use your book. Look back through the chapter. It's just over chapter 2. Okay? Now on the first part of the chapter review, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, those are just definitions. So you'll find all those words either in your glossary or you can find them in the book in what we read, and they're going to be bold. They'll be dark black letters. And you'll just write the definition of those, okay? Now, then on numbers 8 through 12, what you're going to do is if it's true, then you write true. If it's false, do not write false. If it's false, then you have to look at the word that's underlined and write the correct word that should go there. Okay? Do not write false. Just write true or the correct one. And then on the second page, it should be pretty easy. You have some things to choose from. And then 19 through 28, it's you'll have to choose all the correct answers. So some of them, not all, some of them have more than one answer. Let me give you a hint. Number 19 and 20 have more than one answer. Just 19 and 20 have more than one answer. Okay, so that should give you a hint. Okay, so I'd like for you to finish the chapter review today and then send it to me so that I can grade it. And then what I'll do is I will upload, because I have the tests, So I'm going to upload the test to your Google Classroom, so you'll be able to see the test on your screen tomorrow. I think it's 2 pages, so there'll be 2 different pages you'll have to do. And you can either print it out at your house and answer it on the paper, or you can just answer it on notebook paper and then send that to me. Okay? All right, if you have any questions, let me know. That's all for today.